My name is Kezia. As you know, I'm the executive head teacher at Q3 Academy in Tipton, which is part of the Mercy and Trust, a family of very different schools. We're recording this interview today for those in many roles across the school, both teachers and associate staff, senior leaders, teaching assistants, reception staff, everybody, and some will even be parents to boys. So I'm really excited that you're going to come and deliver some in-person professional learning at Q3 Tipton in January. And for today's recording, hopefully it'll be accessed by colleagues in other schools. So for those watching this that don't know you, can you introduce yourself and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Matt Pinkett. I'm an English teacher. I qualified in 2012. I've done a load of different things since then. I was an assistant head at a special school for autistic children. I've been a head of English in an RI school with only 33% pass rate at GCSE. I've worked in a very affluent school where I trained 96% pass and above. I've been a literacy coordinator. I've been an assistant head of year 7. Currently, I'm working part-time. I do 4 days a week as an English teacher with no additional responsibilities. And on the days I have off, I kind of go around the country talking to staff, talking to parents, and also talking to students about masculinity. So running parallel to my kind of teaching career, I've written a couple of books about masculinity, and off the back of that, I'm very privileged to be invited into schools, but also a few media things, talking about Andrew Tate in the press and stuff like that. So yeah, I spend a lot of my time thinking about masculinity. Probably I spend more time thinking about masculinity than I do my actual full-time job of teaching. Now I've been doing it 10 years or so. I'm at a place where I kind of feel like I've achieved what I wanted to achieve there, and I'm kind of ticking along, and I think the kids are getting a good value out of me. So now, yeah, a lot of time spent thinking about boys and men and relationships, men and sex, men and talk, men and academic achievement, men and drugs, men and violence, anything, men and mental health, anything that you can think of. I kind of get stuck in if I can.
That's fantastic. And obviously you've alluded to your books, but I am going to do the direct plug for those people watching this. This was the first one, Boys Don't Try.
Yeah.
Sort of trying to put the question mark there, which is really good, really useful, lots of practical steps, both for leaders and for teachers around boys' attainment. I thought that was good. And then this one, which obviously went a little bit international in terms of the sort of you compulsorily teach romances. Boys Do Cry, which obviously I've found really useful, sort of having a look at that, and particularly some of the research that you've done. It's beautifully researched and it's made very accessible. So for those people that don't always read books about education, they're really great places to start.
Thanks.
So I'm going to start by exploring some of those themes that you and Mark Roberts explore in Boys Don't Try first, and then move on to Boys Do Cry. So although I know they overlap greatly, so could you just explain about how Boys Don't Try came about as a book?
Yeah, all of my stories are long. I'll try and keep it as concise as I can. As an English teacher myself, I was working in a school at the time where I was one of 17 English teachers. I was the only male, working with 16 females. And in that, all my colleagues were great, great teachers, and I probably wouldn't be where I am now without them. But I did become very attuned to the way that the people I was working with were speaking about boys in terms of what they're capable of, what they're and what boys could achieve academically. And if I'm honest, I think I just got a bit peed off. I was thinking, I don't think we can just say that. Oh, I've got a boy-heavy class, so my results are going to be bad this year. And I don't think. I don't think it was malicious. Of course it wasn't. I just think it was part of a fabric of 70, 80 years of stereotypes about what boys are capable of academically. And so I started writing about boys. I started writing a blog about boys and education, and I'm really, really embarrassed about the kind of stuff that I first said. I wrote an article about how the education system was too feminized. I said that the English curriculum was too feminized. Now that's the kind of stuff now I'd recognize as, or I'd probably describe as like male rights activism, quite a toxic, quite a dangerous way of thinking. Anyway, the more people start reading your stuff, and they ask for more or whatever. And so I quickly, I really threw myself into it, I guess, like the research, looking up journal studies, blog posts, whatever I could, thinking about how boys learn, what teachers think about boys. I changed my mind on a lot of things. I absolutely do not think that the education system is too feminized. That's absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, I continued to write, and I was very lucky that a couple of blog posts that I wrote did quite well. They didn't go viral, but lots of people read them, and yeah, a couple of publishers approached me and said, can you write a book for us? Now, I can't tie my own laces. I can't fry an egg, but so there was this other guy called Mark Roberts, who was also a teacher, who I know was writing about masculinity, and so I said to him, "Look, do you want let's write a book together?" And he went for it, and we're really lucky, or I'm really lucky that he said yes, because he was kind of the straight man that kept me grounded, and then this book happened, and boys' behaviour is an issue, boys' mental health is an issue, boys' academic attainment is an issue, and that book dealt with all those things. And so and it dealt with it in such a way that didn't necessarily delve into stereotyping, and I think that's why it did so well in comparison to other books about boys and how they learn.
I would absolutely agree with you there, because I trained to teach much longer ago than you, and certainly as part of my training we were being taught those stereotypes about boys and about the way that they learned. And I think one of the first chapters Mark writes, as an English teacher, it's like, oh, you got to make it all about competition. You got to do this kind of like PQE World Cup, and completely forgetting ultimately it's only going to be 3 kids that are sort of even vaguely invested in it, and everybody else has kind of lost interest halfway through it. But it's a great lesson, and it looks really great. So I think those stereotypes have been around for a really long time. But getting to some of the nub of the issue, that the latest published National Progress 8 schools for 2023 shows girls as an average at plus 0.15 and boys at minus 0.21. So what are the problems with boys, and why are they underperforming compared to girls?
I mean, it was ever thus. I think there are lots of problems. I think there's a problem with the fact that culturally, in schools, boys and girls, men and women, teachers, see that hard work, dedication, strong relationships with the teacher, asking questions, being organised, being seen to be scholarly, these things are viewed as inherently female traits. And therefore, all of those things which are conducive to academic achievement, if they're female, well, then the male traits are the opposite. So, it doesn't matter what rules are in your handbook or on your website. For many boys, of course not all boys, but many boys, the rules that they follow and the rules that they stick to and the rules that they're desperately trying to adhere to are rules like, don't put your hand up. Don't ever say the right answer in front of everybody else. Don't work hard, or if you are going to work hard, don't be seen to be working hard. Don't ask for more work. Don't do the homework. So there is a problem with the way that we see academic behaviours as inherently female. And there's research to show that it's not just students that see that, teachers see that too. And again, that all fulfills in, that all falls into like a self-fulfilling prophecy, of which a part is teacher bias, and the way that teachers, even when, there's research to suggest that, even when teachers say they think boys and girls are equal academically, that in actual fact, that's not the reality of what they believe in terms of how they talk about boys and girls. If you ask a teacher, do you think boys can do as well as girls at school? They'll say yes. But actually, if you listen to them in staff rooms, in staff meetings, in conversations with other colleagues, they'll give voice to opinions like boys are just naturally naughty. Boys just naturally don't like reading. Boys prefer non-fiction. Boys don't like to talk. Boys are naturally a bit disruptive. And so, if the teachers are going into the classroom with these views, this kind of deficit model of academic male achievement, then kids aren't stupid. Even the kids that you think are stupid, okay, all right, they cotton on to stuff, and boys know when teachers have a low expectation of them, and it's the Pygmalion effect in reverse. The Gollum effect means that if a boy feels that the teacher in front of him doesn't think that he's academically able, or thinks that he doesn't like education, the boy knows that, and so why would he bother trying? Why would he bother? Because the people who are paid money to nurture and develop him have already written him off. So why bother trying? And so what we get is, again, this self-fulfilling prophecy of academic male, underachievement.
Do you think parents have any influence over those stereotypes, or what sort of that relationship between student and teacher at all?
Of course, yeah, of course they do. I think parents also have, parents have been gendered. We've all been gendered. We've all been made to believe that boys do certain things, men do certain things, girls do certain things, women do certain things. Parents are no different. And so parents are much more likely to say, oh, my boy doesn't really like to just sit there and do the work. He needs to be active. Or my son doesn't really like, these are all emails, phone calls I've had with parents.
Yeah.
My son doesn't really like his female teacher. Is there any way we could get him a male teacher? He responds much better to males. Or my son, he doesn't really like your teaching style. He's much more of an active learner. He needs to be up and doing stuff. He can't just sit there for an hour and write. And so, yeah, parents, of course, they project all their own biases and stereotypes about the gender of their children onto their own children, but also occasionally project them onto teachers, in their correspondence with schools.
Thank you for that. And obviously I have some experience of that myself. So thinking about that intersectionality for boys who may also have special educational needs, who perform less well than their peers that don't have special educational needs, all those boys that are disadvantaged as opposed to those that are non-disadvantaged, it's just adding extra onto the gap. So what do you think we need to be aware of as educators to make things a bit fairer?
Do you know what? I think that many of the things that we focus on these small cohort groups, don't we? I say small, minority generally. In most settings, they're minority. So we focus on pupil premium children. We focus on the SEN children. We focus on the EAL children. Nobody ever says, do you know what? Maybe we need to look at the way we're teaching boys. Isn't it strange that 49% of the population for 70 odd years continue to underperform in almost every subject, and yet no school wants to take that on? And if we take that on, if you want to get the best of boys, there's no magic bullet. It's actually quite simple. It's actually changing your expectations of boys and what they're capable of. Rather than things you should do, actually, it's really about there's stuff you're probably doing that you need to stop doing. And when we tackle that situation, I honestly think that the SEN kids, the pupil premium kids, they're getting the best of boys is just being a good teacher. And I think that obviously, when we talk about SEN kids and that sort of thing, barring any specialist intervention that their need requires, if we teach them better and we teach boys better, everybody benefits. Girls benefit, high achieving pupils benefit. If we can get the best of boys, we're doing a lot well for a lot of people.
I think it's fantastic that you're talking about just making sure the teaching and learning is as brilliant as it can possibly be. You talk there about things to stop doing. Can you think of some things that we perhaps need to stop doing, either in classrooms or outside of classrooms or in schools generally?
Yeah, I mean, in the classroom, there's three things, isn't there? There's three myths that I think are quite pervasive. There's still that myth that boys are more active than girls naturally, or that boys learn better when they're active. I always go around to schools and I say, put your hand up if you've ever done this. You've got a bit of information that you need to give a class, a predominantly boy class or an all boy class. And rather than just give them the 4 paragraphs or the 5 paragraphs you need them to understand on a handout and hand it out and read it through with them, instead what you do is you take each one of those paragraphs, you blow it up onto A3 paper and you stick it somewhere around the room, and then you say, right, boys, there's some really important stuff I need you to know, but rather than give you the sheet and read through it with you and ask you questions about it and respond to your misconceptions, instead what I'd like you to do is get up out your seats, walk around the classroom, and find the information yourself. And if you're up on your feet and you're all learning, well, that's great. And inevitably what they all do is they all go to the piece of paper that's stuck on a wall 1,000 miles away from you. They start punching each other or, dicking about, and all of a sudden, because that's what we were taught. When I was told that's what active learning is. What do you call it? A carousel. Get up and around, and actually. Those myths, myths like boys need things broken down into smaller chunks. No, they don't. Every student needs things broken down into small, manageable chunks. We know that from how the working memory works. Boys can't apply themselves for long periods of time. Well, I'm sorry, but they're going to have to, because that's how their exam system works. And the only way they're going to get better at it is practice, not from taking that away. I think this idea that boys are somehow active learners is a really damaging one. The second one is competition. I know lots of teachers think that boys naturally are competitive. Boys can often be competitive. It's not natural, though. It's not natural. The boys don't have a competitive gene. There's not a part of the brain, the male brain, that is more competitive than female brains. But the fact is, society, and we teach boys that they have to be strong, they have to be the best at everything. But paradoxically, that competitive element that we instill in boys is the very reason why competition is doomed to fail. Because in the classroom, in a competitive situation, if a boy knows that he could potentially lose that competition, then he's not going to risk taking part in it. So many boys will self-sabotage. So if you say to a group of boys, right, we're all going to do 10 questions. I want you to write them out. And then afterwards, I'm going to ask you to put your hand up and tell me what you got. Yeah, well, not going to bother trying, because I know that I'm probably only going to get 6 out of 10. And there's a boy over there who's a bit of a swot, a bit of a nerd. He's going to get 10 out of 10. I'm not going to beat him. Why would I? I'm a boy. I have to be the best at everything. So I'm not going to put myself out there like that. And also, if I want to win a competition, I'm going to go home and play Fortnite, or I'm going to go on that football pitch, or I'm going to look at some filthy pornography and be the funniest, or be the dirtiest, whatever it is. I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I could win in a classroom. There's far easier competition safe wins that I can do. So competition, boys as active learners. And then thirdly, I think, this idea of making things relevant to boys. So, I can think of football, lessons I've had on grammar, where I've shown kids, football match reports every lesson. Oh, let's analyse the verbs in this, sports opinion piece on the back of the the Sun or the Daily Mail or the Times or whatever it is, other newspapers are available. Or, let's, we're going to do poetry. I'll tell you what, we'll look at Stormzy lyrics, boys. You all like Stormzy, don't you? And so what we do is we dumb down the work. We try and make learning relevant to boys without actually exposing them as we should be to the best of what has been thought, said, designed, created, cooked, whatever it is, experimented with, and actually challenging them, because it's not challenging. If you say to boys, right, we're going to do a lesson on metaphors today, we're going to look at metaphor, we're going to watch this 30-minute clip of Match of the Day, and I want you to write down all the metaphors that the commentator says. That's an actual lesson I've done. And boys just like watching football in lesson. They're not.
Yeah.
Well, I say that the 2 or 3 boys that like football, there might be 7 other boys that don't like football, but I've made that stereotype and I've made that assumption.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've gone on a bit there, but yeah, competition, making things relevant, and yeah, active learning are 3 myths that I think we need to do away with, and we need to take extra effort to ensure that we're not perpetuating.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously, I'm an English teacher as well by trade, and I still hear teachers say, well, I'm going to teach this because it'll appeal to the boys. But I think some of the other things that you've talked about there just apply to any subject, whether it's maths or science or geography or whatever. So that's really useful.
It's funny you say that. The thing about the English, the classic as an English teacher is you've got, what Shakespeare play do we do? Well, we'll do Macbeth because it's got lots of violence in and boys like violence. Or, right, we've got 2 options for the poetry. We can do love and relationships, or we can do power and conflict. Oh, well, we've got lots of boys in this class, so let's do power and conflict. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with doing Macbeth as opposed to Romeo and Juliet, or doing power and conflict as opposed to love and relationships. But if we make those decisions based on stereotypes, my question would be, what other stereotypes about what boys like or don't like, or what interests boys? The kind of content we should be exposing boys to. What are you projecting onto them? If you're making curriculum decisions based on ill-informed stereotypes, what's that looking like in the way you teach boys? That's the problem.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with you. We all know that one size doesn't fit all, and yet quite often we'll just sort of channel our energies into that when sort of choosing or deciding on a curriculum. What do you think? Do you think boys need to be taught by male teachers? And do you think they need to be taught in all boy groups?
No, I think the moment in a female majority workforce, in a profession that has majority females as its workforce, the moment we say boys learn better with men and we need more men in, we're doing a huge disservice to the profession. We're doing a huge disservice to our female leaders, our female colleagues. We're doing a huge disservice to the mothers, single or otherwise, who are reading to their kids every night while dad's at work, to use stereotypes. The people that are the females that are really busting a gut to do the best for our boys. It's hugely insulting to assume that we need more men to teach boys. And actually the research bears that out. If you, I can't remember, I think it was Becky Francis, but studies have shown that, when you account for various variables, actually boys and girls have no preference over the gender of a teacher. And in terms of attainment, boys and girls don't do any better or worse with either a male or female teacher. Good teachers get better results than bad teachers on the whole. Not always, but on the whole. I think when if you ask kids what's more important, the gender of your teacher or something else, they'll always say, actually, authenticity. I don't care if they're male or female, but I want to feel that I'm getting the person in front of me cares, and that they're not putting on an act. Who I'm seeing is who they are, and they care about me. There is an exception to this rule, as there always is. A study in Australia showed that actually boys the only time boys would prefer a male teacher is if they have a health concern. So, let's imagine it's a boy, a 14-year-old boy that watches lots of pornography, and he's anxious about the size of his penis, and he wants to talk to a trusted adult that isn't his parent. He'd prefer a male teacher to talk about that through. I suspect, and perhaps this is a very sexist thing to do, just as I suspect if a girl comes on her period for the first time in the school day, is it right that the only option available to her is a male teacher to speak to? I used to watch all those Educating Essex, Educating Manchester, Educating Yorkshire programs, and in those programs they always focus on the naughty kids or the challenging kids or the cheeky chappy kids, and I noticed that a lot of those programs focus on a particular group of teachers, and they're the teachers in the office who are having to deal with these kids, ring home, the homeschool link workers and all that. And I noticed that in all those scenes, they were all almost exclusively female. They'd be mothering these kids and hugging them and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, based after I read this research that said that actually boys would like pastoral staff that are male, and not just the pastoral male behaviour guy, but maybe a caring male figure. I did a Twitter poll on this in which about 2,000 teachers answered. I said, in your school, is your pastoral caregiving team predominantly female, predominantly male, or 50-50? And 78% of respondents said predominantly female. So I do think there's perhaps an issue there. We need to think, who can boys go to when they've maybe got quite an intimate personal anxiety or worry? That's the only thing I'd say on that issue. But in terms of attainment and gender of teacher, it doesn't matter.
What about the all boys teaching groups? Do you think they work? I mean, within the trust, we do have an all boys school. I know in some of the schools they group children, sometimes by gender, not just for PSHE, but for sometimes academic subjects. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, research shows that single-sex schools do achieve higher academic outcomes, but what the research also shows is that these schools tend to be grammar schools or independent schools, where kids are better set up for higher academic achievement. Again, I can't quote studies that you hear, but they're there. When I come and visit, But if you account for the variables, again, there's not a statistically significant difference. I can see. For me, it's almost a non-issue. I think there are benefits and negatives to both. If you've got a class of predominantly heterosexual boys who believe that to be a boy you have to look unbothered, and they're with some girls who perhaps they fancy, then they might appear more unbothered than they would if they were in an all-boys school. Equally, if you've got a group of boys who just love being laddie on their own, and then they're exposed to girls that they fancy and they want to impress because they want to see that they show that they're do you see what I mean? Show that they're clever. I think it's a non-issue. I think do what works for you in your setting, but I think the automatic assumption that boys will always learn better when they're with boys is problematic. I think again it also assumes that it takes away, it doesn't credit boys with enough intelligence. Boys learn better without girls. Essentially what you're saying is that boys are these kind of I guess the assumption, I've already said the word twice, fancy, but I guess the assumption is that boys won't work as hard because they get distracted by girls. Because boys are these kind of, I don't know, libidinous monsters who, in the presence of women, can't control themselves and can't apply themselves because they've seen a woman or a female and their minds. But I think it's problematic to just say that. But Maybe I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
no, absolutely. And I think when we're talking about sort of these constructs of masculinity, you talk in your books about tender masculinity and non-tender masculinity, and try and not use that phrase toxic masculinity because it does more harm than good. Could you just sort of summarize that for the people that may not have come across it before?
Yeah, so in Boys Don't Try, the first book, we had a real problem with this term toxic masculinity. What we assumed was that, well, by default, it suggests that masculinity is in itself toxic and poisonous.
Mm.
And like a toxin or a poison, unless you've got a gas mask, it's inevitable that it's going to take you over. So we didn't like the idea that simply by virtue of being masculine or possessing masculinity, the quality of being or acting male, whatever that means, that you are somehow toxic. And so we rejected the term. I came across a blog by an American writer called Terra Noir, who talked about this thing called tender masculinity. And tender masculinity is a masculinity that isn't afraid to be vulnerable. It's a masculinity that supports rather than maligns others. It's a masculinity that respects women. It's a masculinity that is hardworking. And I said to Mark, well, why don't we say non-tender instead of saying
Mm.
toxic masculinity? We were looking for another term, so we came up with non-tender masculinity, and we thought that was a great thing, because abusing women, abusing teachers, not doing work, it is abusive. It's non-tender. It's not
Mm.
kind. It's not warm. And the good thing about non-tender masculinity is the moment you say non-tender, we also, I think, we assume that it would signpost people to the alternative, which is tender masculinity. I've since reneged on that. I've since changed my mind.
Okay.
So yeah, about 6 months after that came into print, um, I saw a man in a white van shout out something sexual to a group of schoolgirls as he drove past. And I thought, if I was confronting that man, what's better? Your behaviour is really non-tender, or your behaviour is toxic. And I think that the latter is preferable.
Yeah.
You know, um, in funnily you up this weekend, I came into a lot of trouble. A few male rights activists have found me. They found out.
Lucky you. Lucky you.
Yeah, yeah. I've had a few death threats already. But
Oh,
um, but you what their criticism of me using the phrase toxic masculinity was, I guess, what Mark and I were worried about 3 or 4 years ago when we wrote the book. They started saying, oh, there's this bloke that goes around and he uses the phrase toxic masculinity. What he's doing is he's signposting, he's telling boys that just because they're masculine or just because they're male, that they are poisonous. Now, that's not what I do at all. I love being a man. I love being masculine. I tell boys and girls that. Um, I, the great analogy which somebody shared with me the other day is this: a burger, right? You take a burger is a burger. A cheeseburger is a burger with cheese in it. Now, the existence of a cheeseburger doesn't make us all assume that all burgers contain cheese. And it's the same with masculinity and toxic masculinity,
yeah.
right? Just
Yeah.
because I say toxic masculinity, that doesn't mean I'm assuming that all masculinity is toxic. Just as when I say cheeseburger, I'm not assuming that all burgers have cheese in them.
Yeah.
It's okay to
Yeah.
use the phrase toxic masculinity. When I use that phrase toxic masculinity, or when we use it, we're not saying all masculinity is toxic. What we're saying is there is a substandard masculinity, or there are facets of masculinity that are toxic. And I think there are. I think that's fair to say. I think if we start skirting around that issue, we're problematic. And I've got no problem speaking to kids using that phrase, toxic masculinity.
Mm.
Okay. Because I think, firstly, when I do, I'm always modeling, I hope, like a positive masculinity. We always look at alternatives to toxic masculinity. And the fact is, toxic masculinity, it will grip at some point in one way or another for however long a period, long or short. A lot of men, a lot of boys, I've been toxic. you know what am I meant to just ignore that and not say it? So I'm okay with toxic masculinity now.
Okay. I think what you've articulated there very eloquently, and also sort of putting it very much in the sort of the contemporary sphere of trying to deal with other adults that are almost deliberately trying to misunderstand you, is, that it is a really difficult topic to try and talk about or teach in schools. And certainly, although it's possibly slid down the priority list more recently, we've all been tackling extreme misogynistic views. I mean, beyond just the normal toxic. For example, you mentioned earlier Andrew Tate. What do you think is the best way to do it in schools without alienating students or making it worse? Because I think some schools, not all of them, and some teachers, not all of them, will think, well, I don't want to talk about it because if I get it wrong, it's just going to make it so much worse.
Yeah. There's a few things on that. So you're talking specifically, you asked me, like, how do we deal with Andrew Tate and
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
online misogynist influencer vibe that's going around at the moment? Two things. I think firstly, we actually need to, I've been wrong on this. So we actually have to better understand children. So my assumption up until about 2 months ago was that the moment a boy told me he liked Andrew Tate or expressed some sort of respect
Mm,
for Andrew Tate, my assumption was that that boy was probably giving voice to or thinking about misogyny. That, okay, well, he likes Andrew Tate, he watches Andrew Tate, he must be misogynistic or he must not respect women.
mm,
Interestingly, a study came out last month by YouGov, a study that looked at asked 1,067 boys, um, do you have a positive view of Andrew Tate? Now, actually, when we look at 13 to 15-year-old boys, so year seven, eights, and nines, arguably those most vulnerable to his grooming, actually only 23% said they have a positive view of him. Now, I say only, all the media at the
mm,
time said a quarter of boys like Andrew Tate. Well, that means three-quarters don't.
mm.
In that study, 56% of boys said they had a negative view of him. I don't know what's 56 plus 23, 79. So that means 21%. I don't know if they were living under rocks, but they've never heard of Andrew Tate. But the
Right.
majority of boys have a negative view of him. Interestingly, the same study also showed that when you ask boys that like Andrew Tate, do you agree with Andrew Tate and his views on women? Do you agree with Andrew Tate and his views on hard work? Do you agree with Andrew Tate and his views on spiritualism and religion?
Mm,
Actually, when asked the women question, do you agree with Andrew Tate's view on women? Only 11% said yes. So again, that's an overwhelming majority, 90 or 89%, that said no. So actually, I think children are far better than we, or certainly than I've ever given them credit for, in distinguishing between Andrew Tate, the athlete, Andrew Tate, the Muslim, Andrew Tate, the proponent of hard work, Andrew Tate, the self made man, and Andrew Tate, the weirdo that says weird stuff about women,
yeah,
that he
yeah,
shouldn't be saying. So I think that knowing that, I think just knowing that can actually change the way we approach those difficult conversations with boys. And in answer to your question, how do we deal with it? Well, I'll tell you how we don't deal with it. We don't just sanction boys and then leave them, right?
right.
Andrew Tate and all his lot are telling boys and young men and old men that society doesn't care what men think anymore. So if you're a boy, if you're a man, society doesn't care about you. So the worst thing we can do is silence boys. Obviously, if a boy says something like, "Yeah, I agree with Andrew Tate," um, especially what he says about rape victims and how they deserve it, that needs to be sanctioned. Of course, it does. But we also need to give opportunities for boys to discuss these things. So a boy who maybe voices that opinion out loud, he needs to be given the opportunity to just have a chat with a teacher. perhaps in our sex and relationships education or our PSHE curriculums, which often posit men, I think, as predatory or boys as predatory, particularly in lessons of consent and masturbation, that sort of thing. Perhaps we need to be having a week looking at masculinity, looking at male rights activists, and saying, do you know what? We're going to have a lesson where we discuss this. And I'm your teacher, and I'm a skeptic with Andrew Tate. I can't stand him. I think he looks weird. He speaks weird. The stuff he says is creepy, and it freaks me out. But do you know what? I want to hear you. I want to hear what you have to say. And actually, the moment you say that, boys they're more often than not, they're a bit shocked. In terms of how those discussions run, I do lots of work on this, but 3 things that have really stood out to me. First thing is this: Andrew Tate teaches the people he grooms to tell other people that he's been taken out of context. So if you're wanting practical advice right now, if a boy says to you, "Oh, Andrew Tate's great," and you say, "No, he's not. He once said that it's okay to punch a woman with a machete." 9 times out of 10, that boy will say, "Well, he's been taken out of context." A great one is, "Oh, okay, can you just explain to me what that phrase "taken out of context" means?"
Right.
9 times out of 10, they haven't got a clue. They don't even know. They're just, so already their argument's failing. Second one I often like to say is, look, I'm a skeptic, right? I don't understand what you're saying. I don't understand why you like him. I just can't get my head around it. But can you please talk to me? But rather than, ranting and just going on and on, remember, I'm an old teacher. I'm boring. I don't know anything about TikTok or Andrew Tate. Can you tell me why you like him? But I want you to spend 5 minutes as a group or with a friend, and I want you to, yes, focus on why you like him, but I want your main focus to be on how are you going to tell your message to me in a way that makes me listen. So you might mean using more formal language, because, I like that as a teacher. It might mean slowing down. I notice that a lot of the times you're talking about him, you raise your voice. Actually, maybe just try and speak to me calmly. And when I've done this with boys in workshops and I've given them their 5 minutes to have a discussion, when it comes to speaking to me, often they're struck dumb, because actually when they think, a lot of the time when they're espousing oh, Andrew takes this, or society hates men, they're not really thinking about what they're saying. And the moment you say, I want you to think about what you say and how you say it, they often become quite embarrassed. So I think that's a really good technique. The third thing, I once did I was at a school where I observed teachers delivering workshops that I designed about Andrew Tate, and this history teacher, this boy was Andrew Tate uses this rather horrible analogy. He says that if I've got $1 million and I leave it on my doorstep and go to sleep, I can't be offended or upset if when I wake up in the morning that $1 million isn't there. And that's the kind of analogy he uses to explain that, if you're a woman and you don't want to be sexually assaulted, you need to think about your actions and what you're doing. Right? It's pretty crass. It's pretty horrible. Anyway, this boy was going on like this, and but the analogy does make sense. And this female teacher just said, "Look, I am going to listen to you, but I just want to tell you something." She said, "I'm sweating. I can feel under my right arm. I'm starting to sweat, and my heart's moving." She said, "You've probably also noticed I've got water in my eyes, and the reason for that is I think I might cry." She said, "I don't want you to stop. I'm okay, but I'm finding it really upsetting hearing, a student that I teach and care for talking this way." And anyway, what she basically did was she talked about the physical effects that this 14-year-old boy defending, Andrew Tate's views on rape victims was having on her. And this boy he just stopped and he just said, "I'm so sorry." And I thought it was amazing. And what that to me was a message that, yes, we model how to, balance equations and how to write a PQE paragraph. And we model how to, take a drop shot in PE. We model how to sketch. Do we ever actually model emotional responses to things? And often when these boys normally what they all get is anger back. But actually, when this teacher was brave enough, and I understand that there'll be people listening saying she shouldn't have done that. But for me, it was an amazing example of all she did was make that boy realise the impact of his actions.
Mm.
And isn't that our job? This is what happens when you balance equations this way. This is what happens when you flip a desk. This is what happens when you take a drop shot like this. This is what happens when you say that rape victims deserve it. This is what happened. And when he realised the impact of his actions, he was dumb. Again, he was dumbfounded. He was embarrassed, and he said sorry. And I'm not saying his beliefs changed, but I refuse to believe that didn't have a fundamental effect. Well, I'd like to hope it had some sort of fundamental effect on how he would give voice to those opinions, or whether he would in the future.
I think that was really brave of her. Really, really sort of impressive and calm response, because I think it is so emotive that you do just want to shut it down. And
Yeah, you
I
do.
don't want to feel like that. I don't want to tell you that you make me feel like this. I just don't want you to make me feel like this.
Yeah.
And I think in your books you're talking about the importance of talk for boys, and the importance of relationships, and I think that's a very brave thing that female teacher did. Some really good strategies there. So thank you for that. Another really important chapter in your book, I thought, was supporting LGBTQ plus students. And you start the chapter off by saying you didn't write it yourself, but you asked LGBTQ plus educators to write some contributions for you. So I'm just wondering, I think that's quite brave, but what's been the most useful thing that you've learned from your colleagues from going through that process?
From my LGBTQ colleagues, what have I learned?
Yeah, but I guess it was particularly for that chapter, but I think let's widen it out. Let's just think about what have we learned from our colleagues that you found really useful.
For me, I think, well, in preparing that chapter, I couldn't write that chapter. I'm a straight white bloke. I know nothing about being, almost routinely marginalized and bullied and all that sort of stuff. So I said to colleagues, who are LGBTQ plus, like, I want to hear from you about what it's like. The thing that really came from me from that writing that chapter was the immense good and power of supportive colleagues. So lots of the teachers I spoke to were terrified that the kids that they would teach might ever find out that they're gay or bisexual or transsexual. And I really mean an intense fear, to the point where two people write about, a kid would say, "Oh, sir, did you go out with your girlfriend, or did you go out with your wife at the weekend?" And they would respond, "Oh, yeah, I did." And they talk about this imaginary wife that they didn't have, when in actual fact at home they had a husband. This man had, and I thought, how sad is that? But in a few of the stories in that chapter, this member of staff would say to their head teacher, "Look, I'm gay, and I'm worried about how the kids are going to react. I'm keeping it secret." And actually, the power of a head teacher that says, "What do you need from me? What do you need from this school to help you?" Because actually, you don't have a duty to come out. That's not on you. If you don't want to come out, that's fine. But let me help you deal with any guilt that you might feel, or any inauthenticity you might feel as a result of not coming out. Equally, if you do want to come out, how do you want that to happen? Do you want, what can I do? And I thought, that was so powerful. And, for me, it's not really about the kids in this instance. It's about, as long as teachers feel authentic, and I said earlier, that's what kids value most. As staff, with gay staff members, or LGBTQ plus members of staff, do whatever you can to support them in any way that they need. And I think that that support can only lead to great things for the children, because essentially they'll be being taught by happier teachers who are allowed to be themselves in whatever way that manifests itself, so yeah, support your.
So a plea to head teachers and senior leaders, not just for our LGBTQ plus colleagues, but for anyone who happens to fall under protected characteristics that need to feel more supported to be who they are and happier employees, I guess.
Exactly that. Yeah, that's well put.
Okay. That's brilliant. We're down to our last few minutes, Matt. And it's been really fascinating, and thank you very much for your honesty. Is there anything sort of last lessons, your last sort of Jerry Springer moment that you wanna share with us? I know that you're gonna put some in your sort of your pocket for when you come and visit us in January, but is there anything else that you would really, really want to get as a message across to our staff?
Yeah, I think one thing I would say, a mental health charity at the weekend put a tweet out saying, what's the one thing you wish people knew about teenage mental health? And I said, the one thing I wish I knew is that just because a boy is strong and naughty and disruptive and a bit of a pest doesn't mean that he doesn't have mental health problems. And we often assume that the kids with mental health problems are the kids in minority groups or gay children, and of course they do, right? Statistics show that these minority groups are vulnerable. But if you can think of right now the naughtiest child that you know who does their best to be as unpleasant as they can, that child could really be suffering with their mental health. And that's really, my research for the book really fundamentally has made me reconsider certain behaviors in class, like punching walls, constantly arguing back. I don't necessarily assume that's just aggression now. It is aggression, but it could be self-harm. It could be self-loathing. It could be self-hatred. So I think that'd be quite nice. That's something I think I'd like to leave people on, which sounds a bit negative, but on a positive note, if we all start to think like that, then everybody can get the support that they deserve, even if in how they might present as someone that doesn't need support.
I think that's a really important message to finish on, Matt. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your anecdotes. Thank you for your hat. I'm liking that a lot.
Yeah.
And we're really looking forward to seeing you in January.